Okay, I'm going to jump in at the deep end. This is not a sort of color-enhanced, saturated photo. This is what my hair looked like when I was 18. And so I enjoyed playing sports at school. I loved football. And one particular anecdote to give you a sense of what it was like having hair as bright as that was that at the end of season dinner for our football team, I was hoping to get, player of the season or one of the big ones, right? And the award that the head coach gave me was least likely to get lost in the dark. Then I went into an investment bank, and I found that the forces that sort of conspired against me sometimes at school, being judged before people got to know me or these kinds of things, worked in my favor. I had the right education, I had the right accent, and I was, despite being probably the least talented banker in my year, I worked with Andrew's husband, so she can attest to this. I was on a sort of good path. But Andrew's husband could also probably attest the fact that banks are not enjoyable places to work, so I left. And this experience of going from sort of outside to in-group in two different eras of my life stuck with me. And so I went to do an MBA, and I met Mel Slater and Mavi Sanchez-Bibes. Mel is the most published scientist in the field of virtual reality in the world. And between them, they've published 500 papers. And so, and they know a lot about where they focus their attention is how you can use virtual reality to change people's behaviors and do this by changing their unconscious attitudes. And so we made this company, Kiin, and I won't talk about Kiin much today. I think it's more interesting to talk about the science behind what Mel and Mavi have pioneered, because it's really mind-blowing, and it's a different approach to solving what is a really persistent problem. So, what is the problem? Well, I'll tell a bit of a story with these statistics very, very quickly. Women's football, we've heard some amazing things about women's football and how things have changed since just in the last 10, 15 years. And inclusion, you can find statistics that also paint the picture that inclusion is rising generally in both related to disability, LGBTQ+. However, you still have these massive discrepancies. And this statistic that 4.6% of professional coaches are from ethnically diverse backgrounds versus 25% of players. And there was a study published in 2022 asking black former football players why they thought it was, and the overwhelming response is that bias is a significant barrier. We heard about gatekeeping and all these things in the last panel, about how bias and unconscious attitudes act as these glass ceilings that prevent us from having a fully inclusive sporting world. In the corporate world, which is where I spend a lot of my time, you see a similar situation. And over the last few years, we've seen an increase in things like diversity and inclusion training. But if you poll people who have done this training, they often feel like it hasn't actually moved the dial. And I think the area where people get most frustrated is the people who are already on board are really happy with it, they buy into it, but it's very, very hard to convince the people who are starting from the non-inclusive side. And what can happen is they get more entrenched in their views. And this is what I think we really have to try and change as a society, right? To be less polarized and bring everyone together, particularly the ones who aren't starting with our perspective. And so the new approach, this is the thing I want to explain today. I'm going to come and give some love to the people on this side of the stage as well. The rubber hand illusion. This is an experiment done where I see a few nodding heads. You have your real arm on a table, a rubber hand inside, and there's tapping at the same time. And I don't know if you saw what happened there, but you feel the tapping, you see the tapping, and then when they threaten the rubber hand, and there's versions of this with a flamethrower and a hammer, people pull their hand away because they've had the illusion that something that isn't their body is their body. And this is the crux of what we try and do in virtual reality. There's another video of Paul Giamatti doing a similar experiment where through the synchronization of his movements, he starts to associate the rubber hand and as his own. And what Mel and Mavi did was they said, can we do this in virtual reality? So you're in VR, you have a virtual arm, you start to feel tapping and the movement is synchronized, and then suddenly the virtual hammer comes and people jump and pull their hand away. And then you can extend that to the virtual body. And what they showed is you can have the feeling that your virtual body is your body, your entire body. And what's interesting about that is we can then change the virtual body to create some sort of change in the way you perceive yourself or the way you perceive others. So in this experiment, people were embodied as Einstein, and there were two really interesting findings from this. One, if you put someone in Einstein's avatar and you give them a cognitive test, they'll do better in the test than if they're in their own avatar. So they somehow feel cleverer. The second is a decrease in age bias. So just by being in an avatar of an older person for an extended period of time, if you measure their unconscious bias towards old people, and you can do this using Harvard implicit association tests, they also showed that you decrease your age bias towards old people. So then this was tested in terms of race. And again, the same result. If you take a white person, you put them in a black avatar for 6 or 7 minutes, just looking in a mirror, doing movements, and you give them an unconscious bias test before and after, compare it with a control group who don't get that experience in between time, and you see a significant reduction in bias. So, and we've published 3 papers showing this, another research group has also replicated it. And so it becomes this very interesting way of just giving someone an experience that can affect their unconscious attitudes without having to explicitly tell them anything. And so what I'm talking about today is this concept of learning by feeling, not learning by anything you're told, learning by feelings that you can give people. And there are 3 strands to this. One is the strand that I talked about, embodying someone else. The second is meeting yourself. So in virtual reality, and this was developed with Google and the US police. And what we wanted to do was allow a police officer to interrogate someone from a diverse background, then experience the same interrogation from the perspective of the accused. And what they would experience is the racist interrogation that their police partner had conducted and feel the impact of that, but also see their own behavior replayed back to them. And when you see yourself acquiesce or do nothing, this can be a very strong driver of change. And VR allows you to do this. It allows you to go into a room with yourself and play back something that you've done or you've said. And so in this study, these were the different perspectives. We then put people in a cafe simulation 3 weeks later. And so what we said was, if we put them in a simulation where they have to try and defend someone, or we see if they do defend someone who's being falsely accused of being a pickpocket, what will they do? Will they step in and defend? Will they say something? Will they try and separate a situation that might be escalating? Or will they do nothing? And basically what we found was the control group, the baseline probability that a US police officer would defend someone from a diverse background who's being falsely accused of being a pickpocket was 23%. But after going through this impactful experience, that went up to 79%. So we published that in the MIT Press, and we moved on to the third part of learning by feeling, which is around practicing. And I'll go relatively quickly over this bit, but you can imagine what it's like. You set up a VR scenario. where you have the opportunity to intervene in a scenario. So you could set up a scenario where someone is being unfairly treated, and you can give people the chance to step in and find their voice, and then go into the shoes of someone else and feel the impact of that. So the most recent, here's just a sort of GIF extract of what we built recently. This was in the oil and gas sector. And so just to have this is just a bit of a recap of training strategy in the context of AI, because VR is very closely related to AI. It's a very good mechanism for AI. And when we talk about training or learning, the things that I think you can do now that you couldn't always do is around measurability. So I mentioned the test situation you can set up now, the ability to create a scenario where you can actually measure how people are behaving or performing is very, very good in VR, because in VR you can measure where people are moving, you can measure what people say, how they say it, you get a lot of data points. With AI, you also get the opportunity to make it personalized and adaptive, and so these days a training scenario can take certain branches depending on what you do. I think it's important that training doesn't waste people's time. We become very close to ideas when we feel like we shouldn't be there, or we're obliged to be there, or we've been there too long. I think hence this is a very good reason to keep this talk to 20 minutes. And it's also very, very good for engaging, clearly. With a headset on your head, there's only so many things you can do. And in VR, you can also measure how much time people spend looking at the other avatars. So you can really get a sense of, are people getting a lot out of this training because it's VR, or because I'm actually really engaging with what's going on? And then you can also reflect the values of an organization, because clearly you can create all this stuff digitally, create avatars and this kind of thing. I'll just finish with this idea of uniting society, which is the one I started with. And this is why really I'm so passionate about this technology, is because here you have a technology where you can really reach people at an unconscious level, and you don't need to do much more. You don't need to go into realms where people will feel uncomfortable, maybe shut down to the message you try to give. You let people have an experience, and you let empathy do the rest. And under those conditions, it's really, really interesting seeing how people can change their perspective over a very short period of time. I promised I wouldn't talk about the company, but one sort of parting gift on the company. We work in various sectors at the moment. The sectors I enjoy working in the most are the healthcare sectors, because if you can change a doctor or you can change a nurse, and you can make them feel a closeness with someone who looks different to them or grew up different to them, then there's a multiplier effect because of all the people they will meet. And sport has the same thing. We don't currently work in sport at all, but if we can, it's somewhere where I would love to get involved, because if you can get a coach and you can maybe help them feel closer to people that they didn't grow up with, and help them raise people who might otherwise fall out of a grassroots type of sporting environment, I think you can impact a lot of people. And so if anyone wants to have a chat or get in touch or is involved in grassroots sport or any kind of sport, even at senior level, I'm very happy to have a chat afterwards. Okay, those are my details. Thank you very much.